Hi friends, long time no see. I think it's pretty safe to say we're all doing a lot more of this than maybe we thought we'd be doing when we put together our vision boards for the year 2020. And since this newfound vision might involve a little bit more sitting than we had hoped, I think now is as good a time as any for me to share 5 simple steps to finding an active and aligned standing and seated position. Now in other videos, I'm usually sharing exercises that address specific tissues, muscle groups, or regions of the body. This video is going to be a little bit different in that we're addressing an underlying behavioral pattern, that is, standing and sitting out of alignment. Now, in order to address this behavioral pattern, any behavioral pattern, we have 2 requisites that we need to start with: consistency of action, and the second is repetition of action. Now this is why, when I'm working with folks on active standing and sitting, I advocate the use of some sort of repeating timer for the first 4 to 6 weeks that you're trying to implement these changes. Now we only want to use this timer in the context of the place where we're trying to make these changes. In our case, it's our home office. Now there's a couple ways to set a repeating timer. You can do it manually, but that's contingent on you actually remembering to do that consistently. If you have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, they have functionality that will remind you to stand on an hourly basis automatically, or you can download an app like Repeat Timer, which is like the timer on your phone, but it repeats at the duration you set. That's my alarm. When your hourly work alarm goes off, you then know that it's time to take a break from work and just take a moment to get the blood flowing. You can just take a walk around your space, grab a glass of water, or if you don't have space, do something as simple as a couple of air squats. Take a couple of spinal articulations. Some cat-cow with a gentle back bend. And then once you're done getting the blood moving, now you know that this is your time to take a moment to do your active standing adjustment in 5 steps. So let's begin. So our first point of attention in our 5-point active standing alignment, the feet. The position of the feet dictates the position, that's the rotation, of the legs and femur bones in the hip sockets, which dictates the position of your pelvis, which then dictates the position of your spine. If your feet are turned out, thusly, that externally rotates your legs and ends up bringing your pelvis into a posterior tilt, which then ends up putting your spine in this rounded position. We want to strike a happy medium here. If you're standing, you're going to take a look down at your feet. We want to identify what the midlines of the feet are. If you're barefoot, this is usually the split, this bifurcation between your second and your third toe. You'll follow that split right up the foot, and you'll see that that roughly equates to the midline of your foot. Follow that up higher. You'll notice that's the midline of the ankle joint, the midline of the shin, the midline of the kneecap, the midline of the femur or thigh, and then the midline of your hip bones. So what we want here is essentially something close to parallel feet. So the midlines of your feet are parallel, and then also the midlines of each individual leg are parallel to each other. The end result of having this alignment in the feet and in the legs is a more neutral bearing for your pelvis and a more neutral and aligned bearing for your spine. So in step 1, we created an aligned and neutral position in our body by finding parallel in the midlines of the feet and legs. For steps 2 and 3, we're going to create a foundation of integrity by ever so subtly engaging the low abdominals for step 2 and the glutes for step 3. So subtle an engagement is it that it's not really a clenching, but rather a whisper of awareness in these groups of muscles. I call it a 5% engagement. These 2 muscle groups aren't wrestling against each other, but rather they're in a really balanced co-contraction to help support you in your aligned position, not only standing, but sitting and moving through life as well. In our first 3 steps, We brought active alignment and connection from the feet all the way to about the level of the ribs, mid-back. In steps 4 and 5, we're going to bring that same active alignment and connection to what I call the upper carriage, the shoulders, the neck, and the head, starting first with the shoulders. So typically when it comes to the shoulders, I tend to see mainly two types of misalignments. First, you'll see the often stress-related elevation of the shoulders, the shoulder girdle. As a result, you'll see a tightening of the breathing muscles in the neck, tightening of the trapezius muscles at the tops of the shoulders, tightening of the muscles along the back of the neck. A second misalignment that we so often see is this internal rotation of the shoulders. And what happens there, the muscles of the chest, the muscles of the front of the ribs tend to tighten, as well as the front of the neck. You'll also notice that when I do internally rotate my shoulders, there's this upper rounding of the thoracic spine and the cervical spine, the neck. Before we dig into our fourth cue, I just want to take a couple of moments to discuss the muscular anatomy of the shoulders because it'll help inform our fourth cue much, much better. When most people are referring to their shoulders, they're referring to their shoulder joint and the muscles that are most local to the shoulder joint. The musculature of the shoulders is more like a girdle, much like our hips. The musculature of the shoulders comprises, yes, the deltoid, the trapezius, but also the muscles of the chest and the musculature of the ribs, the rotator cuffs, and the musculature of the upper back. All of these muscles work together to create stability and alignment and range of motion under the best circumstances. This is why it's paramount to the function and health of the shoulders to learn to create the same sense of balanced co-contraction in the shoulder girdle as we just learned how to do in the pelvic girdle with the abdominals and the glutes in reference to the pelvis and the spine being in alignment. So how do we do that? That's where cue number 4 comes in. The language that I like to use to describe this fourth step, this gentle sense of co-contraction in the muscles of the shoulder girdle and the sense of alignment in space in the spine, grounding the shoulders. And there's a few ways that I typically help people achieve this grounding of the shoulders. One way is by instructing them to draw the tops of their shoulders away from their earlobes. Another way that I cue this is by instructing folks to imagine that they're actively making the sides of their neck longer. And then my third way that I like to typically cue this is just by instructing people to draw the heads of their shoulders down their back. One of those 3 ways usually does the trick. Now, when you do achieve this grounding of the shoulders, you will feel that sense of connection in the muscles of the shoulder girdle, and you will feel that sense of alignment, space in the thoracic spine. This also sets a really solid foundation for our 5th and final step, softening the palate. You might remember at the beginning of this video, during our first step, that I mentioned that the position and angle of the feet will have a direct impact on the carriage and alignment of the pelvis and of the low spine. I also said a very similar thing in reference to our 4th and most recent step, grounding the shoulders. And I'm going to assert the same thing in reference to this 5th and final step, softening the palate. You'll see here, if I bring my head forward and down, this creates this very pronounced flexion. This isn't necessarily a bad thing because this is a natural range of motion that's available to us as humans. The problem is in the dosage and in the awareness. If you fall into flexion without awareness that you're doing it over long periods of time, this is where we start to run into issues pertaining to the health of our spine, our shoulders, and how deeply and fully we're able to breathe. How do we find the most optimal position for our head? The easiest way to soften the palate or find the most optimal alignment for your head relative to that sound alignment that we just established throughout the body is sort of a process that's best thought of as 2 mini steps. Our first mini step is we want to ensure that our chin is resting gently behind the bony part of our sternum. While we're doing that, We want to leverage that sensation of grounding that we established in our shoulders in our fourth step to create a greater sense of elongation through the neck, out the crown of the head. And if you're not sure what the crown of the head is, I'm going to walk closer so you can see. It's where my head comes into this point. So when you do these two mini steps, one thing that you'll sense is you've got a more enhanced sense of spaciousness and length through the neck. That's one cue that you've done what you're supposed to. Another little litmus test that I like to share with folks is you want to use your inner physical awareness to assess whether or not the palate or the roof of the mouth is parallel to the ground on which you stand, provided you're standing on a flat surface. If you can sort of assess that the roof of your mouth is parallel to the ground on which you're standing, you can sort of make a bet that you're in proper alignment. So now that we've gone through our 5 steps in great detail, let's just review in short. For the first 4 to 6 weeks, it's always a great idea to set that hourly or bi-hourly repeating alarm in the place where you're trying to make these changes. This will help reinforce consistency of action and repetition of action. When that alarm goes off, then it's your cue that it's time to get up from your workstation, get mobile, and get ready for your official first step, bringing the midlines of the feet and legs parallel to one another. Our second step is we want to gently engage the abdominals. Step 3, we want to engage the glutes for co-contraction with the abdominals. Step 4, we want to ground our shoulders away from our ears, which will act as our foundation for step 5. Tucking the chin gently, creating elongation through the neck, out the crown of the head to soften the palate. Now that we know how to find an active and strong standing position, we already know now how to find an active seated position. All we've got to try to do is retain those connections and alignments as we find our seat. The one exception, I'd say, would be the glutes. It's a little bit hard to hold on to connection in the glutes while you're bending your legs in this double bend. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time. In the meantime, I've got some serious work to do.